A gunshot echoed through the Montana wilderness, startling flocks of birds into the crisp autumn air as Isaac Zimmerman tracked a wounded deer across the rugged terrain in 1876. The 30-year-old cowboy had been on the trail for nearly 3 days, his supplies running low and his patience even lower. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Penny, snorted as they crested a hill overlooking a small valley, where Isaac spotted something that made him forget all about his hunt, a thin column of smoke rising from what appeared to be the charred remains of a cabin. "Easy, girl," Isaac whispered, patting Penny's neck as he squinted against the setting sun. Something wasn't right about that smoke. The blackened timbers suggested the fire had happened days ago, yet wisps of smoke still curled from the ruins. Drawing his Winchester rifle from its saddle holster, Isaac nudged Penny forward down the slope. The scent of burned wood grew stronger as they approached, mixing with another smell that made Isaac's stomach turn, the unmistakable odor of death. He'd smelled it enough times during his years riding with the cavalry to recognize it instantly. Tying Penny to a nearby pine, Isaac approached the ruins cautiously, rifle at the ready. The cabin had been modest, a single-room structure with what might have been a lean-to attached to one side. Now it was nothing but blackened beams and ash, with sections of wall still standing like broken teeth. Outside, Isaac found the body of a man, face down in the dirt, a bullet hole in his back. The man's clothes, what remained of them, suggested a farmer rather than an outlaw. "Damn," Isaac muttered, kneeling to examine the body. The man had been dead for at least 2 days, judging by the condition. Robbery, most likely these remote homesteads were easy targets for the gangs that plagued the territory. A noise from within the ruins made Isaac freeze. He stood slowly, raising his rifle and moving quietly toward what remained of the doorway. The sound came again, a soft whimper that couldn't have come from any animal Isaac knew. Stepping over a fallen beam, Isaac entered what was left of the cabin, his boots crunching on debris. In the corner, beneath what remained of a collapsed roof section, he saw something that stopped him cold. A woman's body curled protectively around 2 small forms. "Hello," Isaac called softly, approaching slowly. "Anyone alive in here?" The whimpering came again, and one of the small forms moved. Isaac rushed forward, setting down his rifle and beginning to carefully move charred timber away from the huddled figures. The woman was dead. That much was immediately clear. Her back was badly burned, and her clothing was singed away in places. But she had used her body as a shield, curling around the children to protect them from the worst of the fire. "It's all right," Isaac said gently as he removed the last piece of debris. "I'm here to help." 2 pairs of terrified eyes stared back at him, a boy of about 6 and a girl who couldn't have been more than 4. Their faces were smudged with soot, and they clung to their mother's lifeless form. "Mama won't wake up," the boy said, his voice barely audible. Isaac felt a tightness in his throat. "I know, son. I'm sorry." He reached out slowly. "My name's Isaac. I'm going to get you both somewhere safe." The children resisted at first, not wanting to leave their mother, but thirst and hunger eventually won out. With gentle coaxing, Isaac managed to get them outside and over to Penny. The boy introduced himself as Samuel and his sister as Emma. Their parents, James and Julia Reynolds, had homesteaded here for nearly 3 years. "Bad men came," Samuel explained as Isaac gave them water from his canteen. "Papa tried to fight, but they shot him. Mama hid us in the cabin, but they set it on fire." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Did you see their faces? Would you recognize them?" Samuel shook his head. "They wore masks, but one had a star on his hand. A star tattoo. That would be the Star Brothers gang, a particularly vicious group that had been terrorizing homesteads across the territory." Isaac had heard rumors about them in the last town he'd passed through. "We need to get you two to safety," Isaac said, looking at the setting sun. "There's a town called Silver Creek about half a day's ride from here. We'll go there first." After saying a few words over the parents' bodies and marking their graves with stones, Isaac settled the children on Penny's back. Samuel sat in front, Emma behind him, and Isaac led the horse on foot. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove, and Isaac shared his remaining jerky and hardtack with the hungry children. As they huddled near the small fire, Emma finally spoke for the first time. "Are you an angel, mister?" Isaac almost laughed at the notion. He'd been called many things in his 30 years: drifter, soldier, cowboy, troublemaker, but never an angel. "No, little one, just a man who happened to be passing by." "Mama said angels watch over good children," Emma insisted sleepily. Isaac tucked his spare blanket around the children. "Then I reckon she was right. Get some sleep now. We've got a long ride tomorrow." After the children drifted off, Isaac sat staring into the fire, his thoughts dark. He'd seen enough violence in his years with the cavalry during the war and afterward during the Indian conflicts. He'd left that life behind 4 years ago, drifting from ranch to ranch, taking whatever honest work he could find. He'd been heading to Wyoming, where he'd heard a big cattle outfit was hiring experienced hands for the winter. Now, looking at the sleeping children, Isaac knew his plans had changed. He couldn't just drop them off at the nearest town and continue on his way. Not when the men who'd murdered their parents were still out there. At dawn, they continued their journey toward Silver Creek. The children were quiet, traumatized by what they'd witnessed. But occasionally, Emma would point out a bird or a rabbit, showing flashes of the carefree child she must have been just days before. They arrived in Silver Creek by mid-afternoon, a typical frontier town with a main street lined by a general store, saloon, livery stable, and a handful of other businesses. Isaac headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Gardner was a grizzled man in his 50s with a thick gray mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened grimly as Isaac recounted finding the burned homestead and the children. "The Starr brothers," Gardner said, nodding when Isaac mentioned the tattoo. "3 of them, Luke, Matthew, and John, plus a couple of other lowlifes they've picked up. Been hitting isolated homesteads for months now." "Anyone going after them?" Isaac asked. Gardner sighed. "County's too big and I'm just one man. Sent telegrams to neighboring counties, but they've all got their own troubles." He glanced at the children, who were being fussed over by his wife in the corner of the office. "As for these little ones, the orphanage in Helena's full up. Could try finding a family here willing to take them in." Isaac felt a strange reluctance at the idea of handing the children over to strangers. "I'll think on it. For now, they need a proper meal and a place to rest." Gardner directed them to the town's only boarding house, run by a widow named Josephine Reed. At 32, Josephine had been managing the boarding house alone for 5 years, ever since her husband died in a mining accident. She was a tall, striking woman with auburn hair usually worn in a practical bun, and eyes that seemed to shift between green and blue depending on the light. When Isaac arrived at her door with 2 soot-stained children in tow, Josephine took one look and ushered them inside without hesitation. "Lord above, what happened to these poor dears?" she asked, already leading them toward the kitchen where a pot of stew simmered on the stove. Isaac explained briefly, trying to keep the worst details from the children's ears. Josephine's expression hardened as she understood, but she kept her voice gentle as she served the hungry children large bowls of stew. "You'll stay here," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "I've got 2 empty rooms upstairs. The little ones can have one, and you, Mr. Zimmerman, can take the other." "I can pay," Isaac began, reaching for his wallet. Josephine waved him off. "We'll settle accounts later. These children need baths and clean clothes first." To Isaac's amazement, within hours, Josephine had managed to bathe both children, find them clean clothes donated by neighbors, and set them up in a cozy room with a double bed. Emma had latched onto her immediately, following her around like a duckling, while Samuel remained more reserved but clearly appreciated the kindness. That evening, after the children were asleep, Josephine brought Isaac a cup of coffee on the boarding house's small back porch. "What will happen to them?" she asked quietly. Isaac sighed. "Sheriff mentioned an orphanage in Helena, but it's full. He's going to ask around town for families willing to take them in." Josephine's hands tightened around her own coffee cup. "Separated, you mean?" "Likely," Isaac admitted. "Not many families can take in two at once." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this reality settling between them. Finally, Josephine spoke again. "What about the men who did this? The Starr brothers. Sheriff knows who they are, but doesn't have the manpower to go after them." Isaac stared into his coffee. "They'll keep hitting homesteads until someone stops them." "Someone like you?" Josephine asked perceptively. Isaac looked up, surprised. "What makes you say that? The way you handle yourself, the way you keep your gun clean and close, the way you check sightlines whenever you enter a room." She offered a small smile. "My late husband was a soldier before he was a miner. I recognize the signs." Isaac nodded slowly. "Served with the cavalry, 5th Regiment, but that was years ago. Some things stay with a person." Josephine hesitated. "Are you going after them?" The question hung in the air. Isaac had been asking himself the same thing since finding the children. "I don't know," he admitted. "Been trying to leave that life behind. Violence has a way of following violence." Josephine nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes justice isn't violence, though. Sometimes it's just necessary." Before Isaac could respond, a cry came from upstairs. They both rushed to the children's room where Emma was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "Mama," she sobbed as Josephine gathered her into her arms. "I want Mama." Josephine rocked her gently, murmuring soothing words. Samuel was awake too, watching with dry eyes that seemed too old for his young face. Isaac sat on the edge of the bed beside him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's all right to cry," he said softly. Samuel shook his head. "Papa said men don't cry." "Your papa was a brave man, but even brave men cry sometimes," Isaac told him. "I cried when my ma died. I was older than you." After a long moment, Samuel leaned against Isaac's side, and silent tears began to wet the front of Isaac's shirt. They stayed that way for a long time, the four of them together in the dim light of the oil lamp, sharing grief and comfort in equal measure. Over the next few days, Isaac found himself settling into an unexpected routine. He helped around the boarding house, fixing the sagging front steps and a leaky roof while considering his options. The children remained with Josephine, who seemed in no hurry to hand them over to anyone else. They began to open up more, occasionally smiling or even laughing when Josephine told them stories or Isaac taught Samuel to whittle simple shapes from scraps of wood. Word spread through Silver Creek about the orphaned children and the cowboy who'd found them. People brought clothes, toys, and food. A few families expressed interest in taking one or both children, but something always seemed to come up: not enough room, too many mouths to feed already, concerns about a child's temperament. Isaac began to suspect Josephine might be finding subtle ways to discourage potential adoptive families, but he couldn't bring himself to confront her about it. The truth was, he wasn't eager to see the children go either. They had become important to him in ways he hadn't expected. Meanwhile, news arrived that the Starr brothers had struck again, this time at a ranch 20 miles east. 2 ranch hands killed and livestock stolen. Isaac's resolve hardened. One evening, while the children were being entertained by Josephine's only other boarder, an elderly schoolteacher, Isaac found Josephine in the kitchen preparing dinner. "I'm going after them," he said simply. Josephine paused in her kneading of bread dough, flour dusting her forearms. "I wondered when you'd decide." She didn't look surprised or disapproving, merely thoughtful. "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow, at first light. I've spoken with Sheriff Gardner. He can't come officially, but he's given me information about their likely hideout, an abandoned mining camp in the foothills." Josephine wiped her hands on her apron. "The children will miss you." "I'll be back," Isaac promised, realizing as he said it how much he meant it. Silver Creek had begun to feel like a place he could belong after years of drifting. "Will you look after them while I'm gone?" "Of course," Josephine said softly. "Be careful, Isaac. Those men have nothing to lose." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. In the short time he'd known her, Isaac had come to admire Josephine's strength, her kindness, and her practical nature. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed flowery words or grand gestures, but who valued honesty and directness. "I've got something to come back for," he said. A hint of color touched Josephine's cheeks, but she merely nodded and returned to her bread-making. "See that you do." The next morning, Isaac slipped out before dawn, leaving a wooden horse he'd carved for Samuel and a little doll for Emma. He'd said his goodbyes the night before, telling the children he had important business but would return soon. Emma had clung to him, making him promise, while Samuel had tried to look brave but couldn't hide his worry. The trail led Isaac into rough country, following the information Gardner had provided about the gang's movements. On the third day, he found the abandoned mining camp tucked into a ravine, just where the sheriff had predicted. 5 horses were picketed outside a ramshackle cabin, and smoke rose from the chimney. Isaac observed from a distance, counting figures as they moved around the camp. All 3 Star brothers appeared to be present, along with 2 other men. They seemed relaxed, confident no one would find them in this remote location. As night fell, Isaac made his approach. Years of cavalry training had taught him how to move silently, how to use terrain to his advantage. He waited until the men were gathered inside the cabin, their guard down as they divided their stolen goods and drank whiskey. Isaac's plan was simple: capture rather than kill if possible, bring them back to stand trial. He'd set fire to their corral as a distraction, then take them by surprise when they rushed out to save their horses, but plans rarely survive first contact. As Isaac crept toward the corral, a twig snapped beneath his boot. A moment later, a warning shot split the night air, and chaos erupted. The Star brothers and their companions burst from the cabin, guns blazing. Isaac took cover behind a boulder, returning fire carefully, aiming to wound rather than kill. He hit the youngest Star brother in the shoulder, sending him sprawling, and one of the other men went down with a leg wound. Luke Starr, the eldest and the leader, shouted orders as he and his remaining men spread out, trying to flank Isaac's position. A bullet whined past Isaac's ear, too close for comfort. He ducked and rolled to a new position, firing twice and hearing a grunt of pain in response. The gunfight continued in the darkness, muzzle flashes the only illumination besides the thin moonlight filtering through the clouds. Isaac moved constantly, changing positions, using the terrain to his advantage. His cavalry training served him well. He'd learned to fight against Apache warriors who were masters of this kind of combat. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably less than 30 minutes, the shooting stopped. 3 men lay wounded on the ground. Luke Starr stood with his hands raised, his gun thrown aside, The fifth man had fled into the darkness. "You've got me," Luke said, blood running from a graze on his temple. "Who the hell are you anyway?" Isaac stepped forward, keeping his rifle trained on the outlaw. "Name's Isaac Zimmerman. You murdered a family 3 days' ride from here." Reynolds was their name. Recognition flickered in Luke's eyes. "The farmer, he pulled a gun on us." "After you tried to rob him," Isaac countered. "And the children? What threat were they?" Luke shrugged. "Wasn't planning on the fire spreading so fast. Things got out of hand." Isaac had to restrain himself from striking the man. Instead, he bound the wounded outlaws and loaded them onto their own horses. The one who had fled would have to fend for himself in the wilderness with no horse, weapons, or supplies. He wouldn't get far. The journey back to Silver Creek took 4 days, with Isaac having to tend the prisoners' wounds to keep them alive for trial. When they finally rode into town, a crowd gathered quickly. Sheriff Gardner took custody of the prisoners, promising Isaac they would stand trial for murder and numerous other crimes. "You did good work," Gardner said, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. "Could use a deputy with your skills if you're looking to settle." Isaac was barely listening, his eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted Josephine standing on the boarding house porch, the children beside her. Emma broke away, running toward him with a delighted cry. Isaac dismounted just in time to catch her as she flung herself into his arms. Samuel approached more sedately, but the boy's eyes shone with relief and admiration. "You came back," he said simply. "I promised I would," Isaac replied, ruffling the boy's hair with his free hand. Josephine approached last, her expression a mixture of relief and something deeper, more complex. "Welcome home," she said softly. That evening, after the children were in bed, Isaac and Josephine sat on the porch swing, a respectable distance between them that somehow felt both too great and not great enough. "Sheriff offered me a job," Isaac said, "as his deputy." Josephine's hand stilled in her lap. "Are you considering it?" "I am." Isaac looked out at the quiet street, the peaceful town that had begun to feel like home in just a few short weeks. Never thought about settling down before, always been moving from place to place. "And now?" Josephine asked, her voice carefully neutral. Isaac turned to look at her directly. "Now I'm thinking maybe there's something to be said for putting down roots, if I had a reason to stay." A small smile curved Josephine's lips. "I might know a couple of reasons. They're upstairs sleeping right now." "Just a couple?" Isaac asked, daring to reach over and cover her hand with his. Josephine's fingers turned to intertwine with his. "Perhaps 3, she admitted softly, "though the third might need some convincing." "I've got time," Isaac said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her wrist. "Sheriff says the job's open whenever I want it." The weeks that followed saw changes in all their lives. Isaac accepted the deputy position, moving from the boarding house to a small cabin near the sheriff's office, though he took most of his meals at Josephine's table. The children began attending the local school, gradually healing from their trauma with the help of Josephine's steady kindness and Isaac's protective presence. Legal matters regarding the children remained complicated. With no known relatives, they were technically wards of the county, but Josephine had been granted temporary guardianship. The Starr brothers and their surviving companion were tried and sentenced to hang, bringing a measure of justice to the Reynolds family and their other victims. As autumn deepened into winter, Isaac found himself spending every free moment at the boarding house. He repaired broken furniture, chopped firewood, and taught Samuel to ride on a gentle pony he'd purchased. He brought Josephine wildflowers he found on his patrols and sat beside her on the porch swing in the evenings, their conversation stretching late into the night. The first snow of the season arrived in early December. Isaac helped Josephine hang evergreen boughs and red ribbons around the boarding house, preparing for Christmas. The children were excited, though occasionally sadness would shadow their eyes at memories of past holidays with their parents. One evening, as they decorated the small Christmas tree in the parlor, Emma looked up at Josephine and Isaac with a thoughtful expression. "Are you going to be our new mama and papa?" she asked bluntly. Josephine nearly dropped the ornament she was holding. Isaac froze, a string of popcorn dangling from his fingers. "Emma," Samuel hissed, embarrassed by his sister's question. "What?" Emma demanded. They look at each other like Mama and Papa used to, and Isaac kisses Josephine's hand when he thinks we're not looking. Josephine's cheeks flamed red. Isaac cleared his throat, searching for an appropriate response to this remarkably perceptive observation from a 4-year-old. "Emma," he said carefully, "Miss Josephine and I care for each other very much, and we both care for you and Samuel. But are you getting married?" Emma pressed, unsatisfied with this vague answer. Isaac's eyes met Josephine's across the room. They hadn't discussed marriage, not in so many words, though the thought had been growing in his mind for weeks now. "That's a conversation for grown-ups to have in private," Josephine told Emma gently. "Now, let's finish decorating this tree." Later, after the children were asleep, Isaac and Josephine stood together in the kitchen, an awkward silence between them that had never been there before. "I'm sorry about Emma," Josephine said finally. "Children have no filter." Isaac smiled slightly. "She's observant and honest, both good qualities." He hesitated, then reached for Josephine's hand. "She wasn't wrong, though, about how I look at you." Josephine's eyes met his, vulnerability and hope mingled in their depths. "Isaac, I know it hasn't been long," he said quietly. "Just a few months since I rode into town with 2 traumatized children and a lot of baggage of my own. But I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Josephine." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Robert died. I made a life for myself, learned to be content alone. And then you came with those children, and suddenly my house felt like a home again." Isaac stepped closer, framing her face with his hands. "I love you, Josephine Reed. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you've opened your heart to Samuel and Emma. I love the life we've started building here." "I love you too," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "More than I thought possible." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, like a question being asked and answered. The second was deeper, more certain, a promise being made. When they finally drew apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Emma's going to be insufferably pleased with herself," he murmured. Josephine laughed softly. "She'll be planning the wedding by breakfast. Would that be so terrible?" Isaac asked, suddenly serious again. "A wedding, I mean, not planned by a 4-year-old. Josephine's eyes widened. "Isaac Zimmerman, are you proposing to me in my kitchen at midnight?" "I suppose I am," he admitted with a smile. "Not very romantic, is it?" "It's perfect," she said, kissing him again. "And yes, I will marry you." They were married on Christmas Eve in the town's small church decorated with pine boughs and candles. Emma was the flower girl, scattering red berries in the aisle, and Samuel stood proudly as Isaac's best man. Sheriff Gardner gave Josephine away, and the entire town turned out to witness the union, followed by a celebration at the boarding house. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Isaac and Josephine stood on the porch of what was now their home, snowflakes drifting lazily from the night sky. "I never imagined this," Isaac said, his arm around his wife's waist. "When I found that burned cabin, when I saw those children clinging to their mother's body, I thought I was just passing through, doing what anyone would do." "You were meant to find them," Josephine said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And they were meant to find me. And I was meant to find you." You believe that? Isaac asked. That things happen for a reason. Josephine considered this, watching the snow gather on the porch railing. I believe we make meaning from what happens to us. Those children lost everything, but they found a new family. You were a drifter, but you found a home. I was a widow, but I found love again. Isaac turned her in his arms, looking into the face of the woman who had changed his life so completely in such a short time. I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret taking in a battered cowboy and 2 orphan children. I could never regret it, Josephine said softly. You're my family now, all of you. Over the years that followed, Silver Creek watched the Zimmerman family grow and flourish. Isaac eventually became sheriff when Gardner retired, while Josephine continued running the boarding house, which became known throughout the territory for its excellent meals and warm hospitality. Samuel and Emma grew up strong and happy, their early trauma healed by the love of their adoptive parents. 2 years after their marriage, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Julia, in honor of the brave mother who had given her life to protect her children. Later came a son, Thomas, completing their family. Sometimes, on summer evenings, Isaac would sit on the porch with Josephine beside him and their children playing in the yard, and he would remember that terrible day when he found the burned cabin. He would remember the woman who died shielding her children with her body, and he would silently thank her for the gift she had unknowingly given him, the chance to find love, to build a family, to put down roots after a lifetime of wandering. And on those evenings, with the sun setting over the mountains and the sound of his children's laughter in his ears, Isaac Zimmerman knew that sometimes, even from the ashes of tragedy, a new life could rise, one filled with love, hope, and the kind of happiness he had never dared to dream of finding.